Well, welcome to Chase Oaks. It's good to be with you. Am I the only one that forgot about the time change yesterday? Maybe that's why you're here at 11 when normally you come at 9. We're glad whichever service you could come, or if you're joining us online. I realized it right before I went to bed last night, and I had to Google whether or not my iPhone would actually wake me up because, I actually did need to be here, for church on time, and things would be weird. So however you got here, we are so glad that you're here. When I saw the design and the name of this series called Fruitful that we're in, it reminded me of my very first job that I had way back at the beginning of high school. I worked at a smoothie shop named Juice Stop. And behind the counter, there were all these different, containers that had the frozen fruits, and then it had the juices and the ice cream and yogurt options. And so one of the perks of the job is that you could go down the counter and kind of play with different combinations and have fun with it. And that included a tray of supplements that you could add on to the smoothie. You could pay to add on. This was a whole new world for me. I had no idea about anything like echinacea, which, helps against fighting colds, or there's fiber, or, a protein powder, energy boosters. I had no idea on any of this stuff. It's like a whole new world to me. We even in the Juice Stop had a tray that was under like a sun lamp where we grew wheatgrass. Is anybody aware of that? And so, which just looked intriguing. It's like we've got a greenhouse in the store. And what we would do is, we would blend it up and turn it into like a green shot of juice. So I was really eager to try that until one of my coworkers said, it's like taking Drano for your system. And I wasn't into that. So I did that, just kind of left that on its own. But the other supplements, this might be hard to believe, but when I was 16 years old, I was a little lanky and I wanted to build some bulk. Who doesn't want bulk in high school? So I went down the thing, and when I got to all the supplements, I'm like, okay, some echinacea, sure. I got to that protein powder, which I, heard helped with muscles. So I put like a double shot of that, almost like I was expecting like Popeye, it just like you'd pop out with muscles all over the place. Do you want to know what happened? Absolutely nothing. The only thing that caused me to, to bulk up was turning 40 and getting 3 kids. And that's not the good kind of bulk. That's the bulk, not the, the bulk kind of thing. What united every person that came into Juice Stop was they were hoping that smoothie would do something in them. They were looking to, maybe it was to get a refreshing snack or to fight a cold, or maybe they needed Drano for their system. I don't know, but they wanted something to happen. They were looking for an infusion of something. And that's a great way to think about this series that we're in right now, because we're talking about the fruit of the Spirit, characteristics like love and peace and patience and gentleness, things that I'm betting all of us want more of in our lives, things that the world desperately needs, and yet can also be tricky to generate on our own. And it's especially true with the characteristic we're talking about today, joy. Life has a way of zapping us of joy. If you were going to a smoothie shop and they had joy on that, supplement tray, we would double scoop that in a heartbeat. We would pay a lot of money. We would go back for smoothies over and over again if it meant that we got an infusion of joy, because it's just so hard to find. It can even be difficult to define what we mean by joy. Think about it. If you're to try to put words into what is joy, is it intense happiness? Is it an emotional high? Is it like having a Zen-like peace while the world is burning down all around you? It can even feel like joy has been mislabeled. I grew up in church, and so, sometimes in church we have some weird songs that we sing, and so one of them, and some of you are gonna, you can't help yourself when I'm about to sing this. I'm not gonna sing it, I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna spare you the singing. It's I've got that joy, joy, joy down in my heart. Yeah, some of you just couldn't help it. It's like a spasm at the doctor's office, just hits. But I remember we would sing that song, and I would look up and down the aisle that I was in at church, and some of the people that were singing that song, I would be like, I don't know where the joy is. So either you and I are defining joy differently, or that joy is way, way down there that you got to go digging for it. It's somewhere in there. But that's the challenge when it comes to joy. Perhaps that's why God has gotten a bit of a reputation for being a killjoy. That maybe you can think of somebody in your life who is overly religious, and there's just not a nicer way to say this, that when they walk into the room, they just have a way of sucking the joy out of the room. There's a show on TV, I've only seen snippets of it. The show is called What We Do in the Shadows. It's a show it's a funny, dry humor take on modern day vampires who live in Staten Island. And so one of them, again, I've only seen snippets, so I'm not here to endorse the show one way or the other. Maybe it's great, maybe it's not. The part I saw was really funny because they were introducing one of the characters that's on the show. He's one of the vampires. This is Colin. We're gonna pop up Colin here. Colin doesn't look like your normal vampire because he's not. Most vampires, they want to suck your blood. That's kind of what they're trying to do, but not Colin. The way that Colin hunts is that he drains people of energy. And the way that he does that, oftentimes he likes to feed in workplaces through things like reply all emails or small talk at the water cooler. He especially loves going to city council meetings where he likes to make statements about ordinances that need to change, and he just feels really full after those type of encounters. And so the show plays with that. They say that, energy vampires are actually the most common vampires that there are, and that you most likely work with one. And if you don't know who that is, then perhaps it's, where I'm going with that, right? And so in our culture, there's a bit of a narrative out there that God is a joy vampire. Maybe we wouldn't say it that harshly. Maybe we would say, God, maybe he doesn't really kill joy, but his joy is not the fun kind of joy. It's the pious one, it's the serene joy, it's the stuff that, when you're sitting in the church pew, it's that kind of joy. But when it comes to happiness or fun, he's gonna drain that from the room. He's gonna zap it out. And I hope in our time together, what we would discover is that couldn't be further from the truth. There's an author and a pastor, his name is John Ortberg. He had this quote that I want us to wrestle with. He says, "We do not understand God if we do not understand this about him, that God is the happiest being in the universe." Now, perhaps for you, like me, when I first read that, I was like, is that really true? Is that the way that I would word that? Because it kind of raised some flags. It felt almost a little disrespectful, or happy was just a weird word to use. But if it is true, it changes everything about how you and I think about and define joy. It changes how we go about getting joy in our life. And so we're gonna put this statement to the test. And the reason why, and it's urgent, is that I think if you and I are being honest, we could all use a joy smoothie in our life right now. Just an infusion of it in our lives. And I think God is gonna help us with that, because that is who he is at the core. And to look at this, we're gonna look at one of the early moments in Jesus' ministry. And Jesus is a great place to look at as we consider who God is, because in his ministry, Jesus says, well, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Basically, if you and I want the clearest picture that we can get of who God is, we can look at Jesus, because he reveals that to you and I. That's what he came to do. And so we're gonna look at one of these early moments when he performs his first miracle. And what he decides to do for that first miracle is significant. I mean, the first of anything makes a lot of difference. I mean, we track first steps and first words. First impressions are really important. And for the Son of God, what he chooses to do for his first miracle says a lot about who he is at the core. And so you can join me in John chapter 2, or you can follow me on the screens. Either way, we're gonna take a look as Jesus starts his public ministry. And this is what it says in verse 1. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding too. So this is most likely a wedding of a family friend, because Jesus' mother is there, Jesus is there. Even Jesus brought some friends with him. I mean, we find that he has his disciples with him. And in this passage, it tells us that these disciples had literally just started following him, like 3 days earlier. That's why it says on the third day. If you count back 3 days, a bunch of these guys started following this strange rabbi. And suddenly they go from not knowing who he is to being his plus ones at a wedding. And the bride is like, really? You're gonna sack me with these new dudes all of a sudden? Like at your wedding, did you have, if you've been married, like did you have any random plus ones that showed up at your wedding? Isn't that a great joy when someone shows up with a weird friend or new significant other and you're like, great, I wasn't planning on that. And I had to get rid of all of my close friends so that your dude could bring a plus one with him. Awesome, great stuff. I'm not bitter. Again, this happened a little bit at my wedding if you couldn't tell. But in weddings in that culture, they were huge community affairs. And so this was not strange at all, like that Jesus would bring some friends with him. The whole community would probably come together because most of these weddings would last up to a week. And so there was a lot of preparation that would go into it, a lot of food, and a lot of stress because they wanted to make sure that the party would keep going and so many different factors that are at play when they would do a wedding. And so as this wedding is going and progressing, a crisis starts to develop because they start to run out of supplies faster than they expected. Here's what happens. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, to Jesus, they have no more wine. This would have been a huge embarrassment for an honor and shame culture. And Mary is trying to help these friends or family save face. I mean, apparently this crisis is happening, but the only people that know about the crisis are in the back. You know, a few servants, Mary is aware, and now Jesus is aware. And at this point, Jesus hadn't done any miracles yet, so it's hard to know exactly what she was expecting, but I mean, she knew Jesus was special. That, you know, he had angels at his birth, and they had said that he was going to do amazing things, and the Son of God, I'm sure, was quite resourceful as a kid, so I'm sure over time she's like, hey, he can figure it out. He's going to solve whatever their issue is. But initially, when she asks him to do something about it, Jesus initially dismisses her. And this is what he says, "Woman, why do you involve me?" Now, let me stop here for a second. Like, even as each service, every time I've read that, I'm like, there's no nice way to read that. Like, it just sounds like I've tried changing my voice, like, woman, it just doesn't sound right. So, just real quick, a side point. In that culture, the word that Jesus uses here for woman is tender, it's polite, like in context when Jesus would later be on the cross paying for the sins of the world, he would look at his mother and he'd say, "Woman, behold your son." So it could be a polite and tender phrase in that culture. In our culture, just a little bit of pastoral advice. Guys, let's think twice before we use the word woman with the ladies in our life. And actually, you don't even need to think twice about it. Just don't. There you go. Take that. That'll be great for you. So he asked, "Why do you involve me?" And Jesus replied, he says, "My hour has not yet come." You know, when he's saying hour, Jesus is referring, and he does this throughout the Gospel of John. He's referring to his big purpose for why he came into the world, that he came into the world knowing that, yes, it was to teach some good things, it was to relate to us, but it was primarily for the purpose of going to the cross and dying for the sins of the world and resurrecting again so that we could know God. And so as Jesus is in this moment and he's talking with Mary, this is his tender way of asking his mom and saying, hey, your concerns, which are good, to save face in this party, to help this couple in this moment, your concerns are great, but our concerns may not be as aligned as you think. Because the reason why I'm here is as I launch into my public ministry is with this goal in mind that's gonna lead to the cross. But I love this because in this moment, Jesus will still decide to act, which means that what he is about to do actually points to the bigger purpose that he came to bring. And so this is what happens. His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." So I love that there was just no conversation. It's just like, he's like, whatever Jesus said, he's gonna do it, and Jesus goes and does something. And this is what he does. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." And they did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Like, imagine you're those servants, too. We don't even know when the water was turned to wine. So I'm just wondering, as they're lugging out this water, they're like, dude, this is gonna be crazy. I have no idea what's about to happen here. He's about to drink bath water. And instead, what happens is it turns into the best wine that he's ever tasted. This is what happens. He said, then he, the master of the banquet, called the groom aside and said, everyone brings out the choice wine first, the stuff from the best parts of the cellar. And then the cheaper wine, the box stuff, after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. With this first miracle that Jesus does, he defies expectations in so many different ways. I mean, he literally does his first miracle to save the day, essentially to save a party. And if you were there at that time, I mean, this just would have shattered everything that you would have thought. I mean, at that time, during that part of history, God's central activity in the world was thought to be in Jerusalem, in the temple. And so anybody who would have thought that if God had something to say, or if the Messiah, who had been long awaited, was going to introduce himself into the world and kind of start his campaign and start to do his mission that he's going to do, that it would have happened in Jerusalem at the temple, probably during some kind of religious ceremony. But instead, what Jesus decides to do for his first miracle is to do something way outside of Jerusalem, in a small town, in the middle of everyday life, in the midst of a party. I think for us as Christians, many of us, I know not everyone is on board yet, and we're glad you're here if you are. But for those of us that have maybe been in the church world for a while, I think we have a tendency to over-spiritualize joy, where joy is something that is meant to be experienced in the context of like a church service, like church pew kind of joy, worship service kind of joy. Or perhaps if we've been in the Christian journey long enough, we think that maybe the journey that God has for us is that we would become almost like monks is what he wants us to do, where we would draw ourselves away from ordinary life. We would be in a perpetual church service, always praying, always reading scripture, and that's would be our life. And I think what Jesus here is kind of reminding us and showing us with this first miracle is that he came to infuse everyday life with joy, his joy. Joy in the middle of your school, joy in the middle of your work life, joy at your kids' parties or soccer games, or in the midst of a challenging family situation, in the middle of life's activities and festivities, that is where he wants to meet each of us with a sense of his joy, real joy. And another way that this defies expectations is the fact that Jesus was at a party and what happens at that party. There were some Bible teachers back in the 19th and 20th centuries during the temperance movement, prohibition, all of that simply couldn't wrap their minds around the idea that Jesus would drink, let alone make alcohol. And so they jumped through all these different hoops to try to make sense of it. Like they're like, well, maybe he didn't actually turn, the water into wine. He just kind of tricked them and served them water. And it's like, well, no, he did a miracle. Like there's something that happened here. And so then someone said, well, you know what? The kind of wine that Jesus would make wouldn't have that yucky alcohol in it. So it must have been unfermented grape juice, which is quite a reach because the text clearly shows us that there is some alcohol in this wine. And just imagine, if you're at a party and you're having a good time and drinking some, alcoholic wine, and then someone comes and hands you some Welch's grape juice, you would be amazed, but probably not in the awesome amazed way. But it's part of a larger narrative that some people had, particularly some of these teachers, where they're like, okay, if God was going to show up at a party, what he would do is he wouldn't turn water into wine, he would turn the wine into water. Because it's part of that narrative that God is out almost like to zap anything that seems pleasurable or to seem fun. But when you think about it, God has infused in this world his pleasure everywhere. On my way in this morning, I saw the sunset. And think about it. The last time you saw a sunset, God didn't have to make that beautiful, but he did. The way Psalm 19 describes the sunset is that, God actually designed it and infused it with his joy, where the sun is compared to a victorious champion that rises out every morning with its fists held high, celebrating the start of a new day, that's how God designed the sun to be. Or think about food. In each of our mouths, there are somewhere between 2,000 and 8,000 taste buds. And one of those purposes, perhaps the main purpose, is because God designed you to be able to delight in good food. Or think about something like sex. God designed it. It was his idea. It's not like he's up in heaven, like kind of sheepishly looking down, like, look at what they decided to do again. I can't believe they're doing that. No, it was his idea, and he designed the context of it, marriage, not so that he could squash rules and kind of tamp down fun. He designed it so that we would have a pathway to experience the greatest amount of joy through a good gift that he designed for us to have. Or think about that with wine. Jesus drank alcohol, and the Bible is not anti-drinking. It is anti-getting drunk. And there's reasons to be wise with that. Based on your health goals, or maybe your family history, or maybe your own personal history, there are wonderful reasons to avoid alcohol, wise reasons to do that, and we should use wisdom when it comes to it. But at this party, Jesus drank, and not only did he drink, he made alcohol, and he made a lot of it. Like, if my math is right, and you should never trust a pastor's math, there's a reason why we're pastors. But if my math is right, he made about 180 gallons of wine. And not just the amount, he made the best of the best. Why? I think it was to show something powerful about who he is and what he came to bring. There was a prophecy in the Old Testament that talked about the coming Messiah, about how God would have this promised figure who would come, who would usher in an era where God's people would know God in a whole new way, in a deeper and richer way. And this is how it's described in the book of Isaiah. And I think Jesus had this in mind. In fact, I'm pretty sure he did have this in mind. The disciples probably didn't pick up on this until later, but I think this is what he was referring to in Isaiah 25. It says, "On this mountain, the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich food for all peoples, a banquet of aged wine, the best of meats and the finest of wines. On this mountain, he will destroy the shroud that enfolds all people, the sheet that covers all nations." What is that? He will swallow up death forever. The sovereign Lord will wipe away tears from all faces. He will remove his people's disgrace from all the earth. That what Isaiah is prophesying is that when God would come, he compares it to a party. And when Jesus comes and makes all that wine and the best of the best wine, I think it was showing that as God was entering into the world and ushering something new with Jesus, that it wasn't just a little bit of joy, that God actually came to provide over and abundant, above and beyond kind of joy that would blow people's minds. The idea that imperfect people like you and me could now have this rich, personal fellowship with the God of the universe because of what Jesus would do at the cross. And that what Jesus did at the cross started that movement. It's what we're experiencing now, that you and I can have fellowship with God because of what he did. But it does point to an ultimate future, that when Jesus comes back, there will be a big reunion, and it will be a huge party, a celebration. Another prophet words it this way, and I love this image. Zephaniah says it this way. He says, "The Lord your God will rejoice over you in that moment with singing." Have you ever thought of God as a singer? Where my brain starts to go is I automatically start to say, well, what kind of a singer would he be? Would he be like a rock star, polka, pop star, I was watching the opening ceremony of the Olympics, and they had it in Italy, and Andrea Bocelli was singing. And so one of the commentators said, well, if God was going to have a voice, it would sound like Andrea Bocelli's. And maybe it would sound like Andrea Bocelli's. I tend to picture God like kind of the lead singer of a great rock band where he's got the angels that are rocking out behind him, playing background vocals, and God's like has this sweet lick on a guitar just singing out. Maybe that's sacrilegious. That's just where my brain goes with it. But whatever it is, however you picture it, there's one thing that's for certain. His singing will be joyful because that's who he is. That's who he is at the core, and it's what he came to bring. And it's what Jesus said that he came to bring. He said he came into the world so that, these are his words from John 15, so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. And that's my big idea for today, that God is not a joy killer. He's a joy bringer. He wants you to experience the fullness of joy, his joy, and not some cheap knockoff. You know, as one of the things I was thinking about when we were preparing for the series, I talked about the design and the look and the title and all that, and it made me think of the smoothie shop. There was something else that came to mind as I saw the design of it, and it was a gum from my childhood called Fruit Stripe Gum. Does anybody remember this gum? Yeah, do you know, this made me sad. I looked this up this week. Do you know that they discontinued this gum 2 years ago? So if you have Fruit Stripe Gum somewhere, it's worth a lot of money right now. Kids, so kids that are here, students that are here, you have no idea about the wonderful goodness of Fruit Stripe Gum. So let me educate you a little bit because, I mean, this was quite the thing. So for me, how this would work is, you know, we would be in the checkout line at the supermarket and you would see, you know, a box that had, you know, and you saw the picture of it, like it had the stripes with the zebra on it. It looked so fun, you know, and then you would open up, you know, the gum itself and it had stripes on it and the gum had different flavors. It was fruit flavors of like lemon or cherry or orange and all that. And so you'd get excited, you'd pop one in your mouth and you'd get this immediate rush of fruit flavor that was so tasty for about 30 seconds. And then what would happen? It turned into sludge, right? Like it's the nastiest chalky sludge. So you'd spit out that piece of gum. And then what would you do after that? You put another one in. And it would last for about probably 5 to 10 minutes of, you know, that back and forth that happened. It was greatness if you've missed it. I think that is an amazing picture for how you and I tend to experience joy. That we buy that new gadget or get that car we've been waiting for. We go on that amazing vacation, or it could be just any number of things, food, drinks, sex, whatever it is. Anything that in the moment we hope would turn into joy. And you know what? In the moment, it probably does until it fizzles and falls flat. Or worse, where it turns from joy into sludge. You know, discontentment and frustration. Just ask anybody who owns a boat. What God wants for you and me is so much richer, so much deeper. Not momentary happiness. He wants us to experience his joy, the very joy of God. And think about it. If God was to experience joy that is above any circumstance that we have, joy that is best described as deep gladness, that settles over everything, that permeates under everything, that is based on who he is, based on his ultimate purposes that can't be thwarted, and is accessible to you and I anytime. But here's the challenge, is that because it's his joy, you and I can't generate it, we can't manufacture it, we can't consume our way to it. The only way you and I can have that kind of joy is to receive it. And that can be tricky to know how to do. In fact, it's a little counterintuitive when it comes to trying to receive his joy. So I want to get practical. Like, what does that actually look like if you want to open yourself up to receiving more of his joy in your life? And I want you to picture a boat. Again, we already made fun of boats here for a second. So it's a borrowed boat. Like, think of someone's borrowed boat. That's a sailboat that you're out on the water. And think about how a sailboat works. That a sailboat can be powered a couple of ways. I mean, you can row or you could have a motor, but the most powerful way that you can move a sailboat is to lift the sails up into the wind. And to picture the wind being God's joy. And because God is abundant in joy, he's not stingy on it. It's who he is. It's everywhere. Picture a gusty wind on an open sea. And that what yours and my job is to do is to position our sails in such a way that we would receive more and more of his joy in our life. So there's 3 ways I want to highlight. I think there's more than 3, but there's 3 that maybe will get the conversation started. That the first way you can receive joy is through his path, through his path. David in the Psalms words it this way. In Psalm 16:11, he says about God, "You make known to me the path of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand." That when it comes to finding flourishment in this life, like God hasn't hidden that from us. He's revealed it to us through his word, through Jesus. The way that the book of Proverbs, which is a great place to look for wisdom, it's general principles about how God designed this world to work. And the way it talks about wisdom at the beginning of the book is that as God was it's a great image, as God was sewing the fabric of existence, he was weaving in his wisdom throughout all of it. Or if you're to think of a foundation, and you're mixing the concrete, that as God's mixing the concrete for how the world would work, he actually put into that foundation his goodness, his justice, his path for flourishing, and it's everywhere. And so that the people that find the most joy in life actually figure out a way to not only know that plan, but align their lives with it, almost in the current of how he has designed this world to work through his path, through his flourishing. The way Jesus would describe this in the Sermon on the Mount, which the Sermon on the Mount talks about living a blessed life. And blessed can be translated so many ways. And one of those ways is happy. It could also be joyful or content. That as Jesus talked about, if you and I want to live a blessed life, it comes like the wise man who builds his foundation on the rock, who builds his foundation on Jesus because it's sturdy. So I want you to have that image in your head of okay, well, what does it take to build something on a rock if you're to build a house? It takes intentionality and it takes time. Decision by decision, brick by brick. And that through that process, it's us aligning ourselves in the path and setting ourselves up for joy. One of my mentors in my life, his name is Roland Boyce. He used to be a staff chaplain here. Many of you know Roll. He was here for many years as a pastoral counselor. Amazing man. He's worked at so many different churches, and so he and I still get together every so often. We did about a week or so ago. And I was reminded about how when he would meet with couples who were in marriage crises moments where their marriage was far from joy, he would have this statement that was actually meant to be encouraging. He would say, okay, we didn't get here overnight, and so we won't get out of it overnight. And what he was trying to encourage them with is this path idea that, hey, as we start to turn this marriage maybe around, as we start to build this marriage around God's principles, as we try to figure some of this out together, the initial steps probably won't feel natural, pleasurable. They may not even feel all that great or that momentum's not happening. And yet, as we're doing it, we're actually setting ourselves up over time to start to get ourselves in line with how God has designed everything to work. Almost like each decision you're making that lines up with God's path is like raising that sail up and up into the wind and getting more and more of God's joy in your life. Another way you can receive God's joy in your life is through his purpose. Jesus came with a big purpose in mind, and this is how that purpose is worded in Hebrews chapter 12. It says, "For the joy set before him, Jesus endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of God." The cross itself, agony, shame, and pain. But what lay beyond the cross was resurrection, defeat over sin, or in other words, joy. And that perspective can be so powerful for you and I as we're in the midst of tough situations going on in our life, ones that we wouldn't say are pleasurable, that in that moment, it's not thinking through what's happening right now, but actually in part of the bigger plan. I love how one of our production team members put it. His name is Josh. He's an amazing guy, and he was praying before our Friday night service. And I love the way he worded it in this prayer. I was like, I'm going to steal that because that's better than what I had put down. In his prayer, he just says, God, on the other side of whatever it is we're going through is victory. On the other side of whatever it is you're going through right now is victory, resurrection. And that can be powerful perspective in the moment. where we may not be feeling the pleasure, but we know that we're a part of God's big purpose. And in the meantime, God is actually at work. He is redeeming and restoring a broken world. And one of the most powerful ways that you and I can experience joy in this life is when we connect our story, our strengths, and our gifts to that larger purpose that God is up to in the world. Another thing this reminded me of was a movie that came out many, many years ago called Chariots of Fire. Most of us probably remember Chariots of Fire just because of the slow motion scene where they're running on the beach and, they got that soundtrack, the ding, 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 ding. You guys get, am I the only one that's seen this? All right. You're getting nothing. That was my best, humming that I've done in a church service, so you're welcome for that. But behind that famous scene is an amazing story of two British athletes who go from relative obscurity to winning the gold in the 1924 Paris Olympics. And one of those athletes, his name was Eric Liddell. And Eric Liddell was a runner who's also a devout Christian. So the movie is about his story as he's navigating faith and how to do that in light of being an athlete and competing in the Olympics. But I love this quote that he has in the story because he says this. He says, "I believe God made me for a purpose, but he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure." Is there anything that you've ever done in your life where you can feel God's pleasure? It's an amazing feeling when you do. And if we want to experience more joy in our life, part of that is discovering, okay, God, how have you wired me? How have you set me up? Because he wants to use each of us as a conduit for his purposes. And as we're a conduit for his purposes, it actually is a conduit for his joy. Especially when we connect those strengths to a larger goal, not using them just for ourselves, but to build other people up. That could be a powerful way to experience joy. A final way I'll highlight today is to receive God's joy through his presence. Through his presence. Psalm 16:11 talked about in your presence is the fullness of joy. I was listening to a podcast earlier this month from a guy named Steve Cuss. Steve is a former hospital chaplain. He's now an organizational leader. He works with churches. He works with pastors. He wrote an amazing book called Managing Leadership Anxiety. Just the title alone was intriguing enough. If you've ever felt anxiety in your leadership, that's a great book to read. But on this interview, he was talking about his time as a hospital chaplain. And as you can imagine, as a chaplain, that is a difficult role to be in, where, you're on call for 24 hours at a time, and you could get called out to any number of hard situations. And he recalled how, as a chaplain, there were times where, this is his words, he would find himself being reactive. And by reactive, he means anxious, he means frustrated, annoyed, even just a little bored in life, any number of things. He'd find himself being reactive as he's about to enter into one of these rooms. And then he would stop and he would do something in his brain where he'd say, you know what? I was noticing that I had stopped noticing the Lord. And then in that moment, what he would do is he's finding himself with all these emotions and reactivity. And part of that being the uncertainty of what lay behind the door he was about to enter into. He would say, okay, but God, you're already in that room. And my job is to enter into that room and to notice where you are. Connecting it back to the story we did for this talk about Jesus in that wedding in Cana, I can't help but wonder how many of those people were so oblivious to everything that was going on. Like, oblivious to the fact that this wedding was on the verge of chaos, on the verge of just spiraling out of control, and they had no idea. Even more so that they were oblivious that the Son of God was at that wedding, but not, get this, he was at the wedding, but he was in the kitchen, in the back, serving up unexpected joy that they had no idea. And so I don't know what rooms you're walking into this week. Maybe they're rooms that are full of anxiety or frustration. Maybe they're rooms that are full of boredom and routine. Whatever those rooms are, I think an invitation for all of us is to say, okay, I want to notice the Lord and remind myself in the moment that as I enter into that room, that he is already in that room. And that part of my job is to simply notice him. Like how many different things are going on in our day that we just are oblivious to? Minor miracles that we ignore or don't think about all that often. I mean, even the miracle of air conditioning, and or if you have young kids in your life, and I know it can be tiring and frustrating, but also to notice when they're laughing and joyful, and or maybe it's the taste of a good meal that you are about to have this week. That all of those things are good in and of themselves, but if we can connect them to the source of all joy, I think that's a powerful way to receive what God wants for each of us. And so as we close today, I want to remind us of the premise of this series, because it's about the fruit of the Spirit. And the idea is that this is the kinds of characteristics that God produces in our life when we are deeply connected to Him. And so if you're finding yourself not experiencing joy at this moment, that should be a warning sign for all of us. And I'm not talking, hear me, I'm not talking about momentary frustration or disappointment. That's life, that's part of it. But I think we can all tell, maybe in our own life or maybe in the lives of other people in our life, when grumpiness has set in, where you can almost see the perma frown on your own face or on the face of somebody in your life, where the wrinkles start to show that it's just like that person is always feeling it, always unhappy. And I think with what we've learned today, that should be a signal to us that maybe there's bigger disconnect in our connection with God than we would care to admit. And unfortunately, in our culture, Christians have gotten the reputation for being grumpy, and that's a problem. So I want each of us to think of some way this week that you can lift your sails up a little bit more to receive God's joy. Maybe it's aligning your life with His path a little bit more, or learning more about what His wisdom looks like in a situation you have and actually applying it to your life. It could look like trying to figure out your purpose a little bit more, or taking some God-given gifts and saying, okay, I want to use them not just for myself, but to build up His kingdom. Or it could look like, as you leave here today, to simply go have a great meal and to thank the God who provided it for you. And as we do that, a powerful way that I think you and I can remember God's joy is to pray this prayer that I'd like for us to pray together. So would you stand up with me? Because throughout this series, we are going to do a prayer. It's a community prayer together that is based off of Romans 15:13. It talks about the different fruits of the Spirit. And it's a great way to invite in and remind ourselves that, okay, these characteristics are not produced by me. They're produced by God. And so in light of the fact that we talked about a wedding, I'm gonna put on my wedding hat as a pastor. I do this a lot where, I say a line and then they repeat after me. So I'd like you to do a repeat after me. I'll say one line and you say it. We got it? We're all smart people. We can do this. All right, let's put this slide up on the screen and repeat after me. God of joy, by the power of the Holy Spirit, fill us with your joy, so that it will overflow out of us each day and every way in the week ahead. Amen. God bless you. Thank you.